So I'd love to introduce our first speaker of the session. Her name is Zenia Tata, and Zenia is amazing. She has done incredible work in over 20 countries now. She has a really unique capacity for creating opportunities that marry entrepreneurialism with the most impoverished areas and creating solutions that then meet a societal need. She is the Executive Director of Global Expansion for XPRIZE, which many of you know is a phenomenal competition where it's an educational foundation, and they seek to create public competitions that encourage technological development. And they work with everyone from the Gates Foundation. Elon Musk is on their board. We'll talk about some other curious people. James Cameron. It was really fun to look at that, and I have a lot of questions for you afterwards if you've actually gotten to ask them questions. But really, they're doing phenomenal things. And one of my favorite quotes from Zenia is, "You need a mindset that allows for failure. We need to ask, how are failures rewarded?" And when we're curious and when we're exploring, sometimes we make more mess than mastery. But we need to see that repetition really as determination. So, Zenia.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Thanks. Hello, everyone. How are you? End of the day, huh? All right, well, let's kick this off and hopefully bring the energy way up in this room, too. So, we live in amazing times, wouldn't you agree? Think about it. 100, 120 years ago, if you wanted to impact social change, mass transformation, really do some good on this planet, you had to pretty much be royalty. You had to rule over something. You had to be the governor of a province, or you had to be one of the very few wealthy philanthropists that existed about 100 years ago, right? But that's not the case anymore, right? People like you and I today, ordinary people, can have impact in the world and can make a difference. And I know you all agree because you're all sitting in this room. So what has changed? Well, technology, I'd like to propose, has been one of those key enablers. And I'm talking about all kinds of technology. You may not even consider very innovative, actually came from a prize. So 380 years ago, Napoleon Bonaparte, remember that guy from your history books? So Napoleon Bonaparte put out a prize for 26,000 francs, almost 400 years ago, for the first person who can safely sustainably package and transport food. This man, Nicholas Appert, an ordinary candy maker, came up with a revolutionary technology that you and I use till today. It's called canning. When was the last time you touched a jar of food, a jar of jam, opened a bottle of ketchup? That's this guy's innovation that we still use till today. And 400 years ago, almost to the day, this man, John Harrison, won a prize put out by the British Navy. The British Navy were having a lot of losses at sea, so they put out a 20,000 pound prize for the first person who could accurately measure longitude at sea. John Harrison was a lowly London clockmaker, and he came up with technology that today enables all the innovations that we have in GPS and carry around in our pocket. And the prize that really influenced us was the Ortigue Prize, $25,000, given in 1920s, for the first person to make a transatlantic flight. And this is Charles Lindbergh. He really influenced our first XPRIZE. And the whole, you know, the big innovation here wasn't that he made this prize, made this run and it was successful. The innovation was that he himself was an underdog. He had only had his pilot's license for 2 years before he took this run. Nobody even wanted to loan him an airplane because he was so inexperienced. And what did we learn from that? We took away that innovators can be everywhere. Risk takers are what we need for our competition. And then the biggest breakthrough, of course, was not the flight itself, but that the year after the flight, a new industry, an aviation industry was born. And that industry, of course, touches all of our lives today, right? How many of you have been on a plane just today, for example, or in the last 24 hours? So this influenced our first XPRIZE for suborbital flight. And the teams, this was first put out in the mid-90s. Think about what was happening then. You know, a lot of work was going on in suborbital space. Satellites were going up. They were controlling our grid. They were doing all kinds of amazing things. But yet, people like you and I couldn't go to space. It was only governments who could go to space. We wanted to change that. So we offered a $10 million prize for a privately funded team, because governments weren't doing this anymore, to fly 100 kilometers into suborbital space, enough to make the point, carry a passenger payload of 3, pilot, co-pilot, 1 person, a lay person who doesn't know how to fly, and do the same flight twice in 2 weeks. Because we needed reusable spacecraft. So you incentivize what you want to get out of it. And this was the winner, Spaceship One, that won this particular prize. And we really didn't think we would go on after this particular prize. But then we learned something amazing. We learned that prizes are a really powerful tool to incentivize innovation and to go out and find innovators at the edges. We learned that this tool allows us to democratize innovation. So for our prizes, you don't have to be a nonprofit or a for-profit or a LLC or a PhD or any of those labels. All you have to do is be crazy enough and have a good enough idea that you can prove to the world that you can do this, and you're welcome. And now the new challenge that I've been tasked with is, how do we find these innovators at the edge of the world? How do we find them in these emerging economies? How do we find them in places where they may not otherwise hear about us? And then once we find them, how do we level the playing field so that they can compete on the same footing as some of you in this room? Extremely challenging. Anyone wants to talk about this later? I would love to. We launched a Global Learning Prize. We're testing this prize in Tanzania in another year or so. We launched this prize last year, $15 million to take a child in a zero literacy environment to basic literacy and numeracy without any teachers. Basically, it's a software prize, $15 million to write this kind of transformative code. What was exciting? 400 teams. What was more, from all over the world applied. What was more exciting? They came from 44 countries, and over a quarter of them came from sub-Saharan Africa, which is where we're going to test this prize. So again, innovation comes from everywhere. We need to go out and find it. Prizes also allow us to prove that we can reach these new scales of audacity, new levels of audacity. Nothing is off limits. We're really about making the impossible possible. They leverage donor investment in many ways as well. Many of you may have heard of our Google Lunar XPRIZE. Again, the teams have to do four very simple things. You have to be a privately funded team, then you've got to take off from Earth, then you have to land a rover on the moon, and then lastly, you have to row 500 meters and send high-resolution digital imagery back to prove that you're not somewhere out in Death Valley and you are actually on the moon. So this Google Lunar XPRIZE, where we had teams from all over the world once again. We have in the finals a team from Israel, a team from India, a team from Japan, and of course many homegrown teams from the US as well. And prizes, this model helps us address these overburdened systemic failures. I just finished designing a first prize that we're hoping to launch in India next year, which is in the future of water. This is a futuristic prize that will allow people everywhere to create rain in a box, to basically have water on demand when they need it, where they need it, without the interference of governments, without the interference of municipal piping. So stay tuned for more on that. And then prizes, of course, vastly change perception. When we launched the Ansari Prize, we were either on the cover or featured in the 100 top magazines in the US, or media outlets in the US. So we're hoping to use this leverage to open the conversation and change the conversation about women's safety, for example, in places like India. Because what we're saying is, when governments fail to keep their people safe, then isn't it up to social innovators like you and I? Isn't it up to entrepreneurs? Isn't it up to the private sector to step in and say no more? So, and lastly, our prizes only pay for success. We have a very exciting prize in its final month of testing right now. It's a $10 million prize. For all of you in healthcare here, or all of you who've ever worked in a refugee camp, or in a village, or in a rural clinic somewhere, think about this. This is for a handheld device, a device that fits in the palm of your hand and can non-invasively diagnose up to 18 health conditions. Heart disease, stroke, chronic conditions like diabetes, pneumonia, malaria, strep throat, flu, etc., typhoid, etc. Imagine how this will change healthcare in parts of the world that some of you and myself have worked in. So I'd like to end with this. If you are curious, if you are a curious optimist, like Elizabeth said, if that's who you are, and I think most of you are, and if these are the problems that keep you up at night, these are the nagging thoughts in your head like they are in ours, then follow us, join us, learn more about us, come compete in our conversation, in our competitions, join the conversation. So if these are the questions, can you create rain in a box? How will we not just feed, but nourish 9 billion people by 2050? Can nanobots really help destroy cancer cells or HIV cells? Can a machine help the elderly live more productive and independent lives? And finally, when will our oceans finally be clean? How will we ever be able to store the sun? And of course, how can we keep millions, hundreds of millions of our sisters safe when they don't feel safe within their own homes and within their own communities? So again, in this vast universe of possibilities, of grand challenges, I hope you will join me in my optimism and see a lot of good that can come out of using innovation in models like these. So thank you so much for your time.